Hi, I'm Vince Weston, and this is an update, and I hope to do a quick demo here on just the methods I use with these kits from Toy Biz. To start off, well, I've been working on Red Skull. He's actually not as complete as he looks. He's just been dry fit at this point with a couple of pieces, rubber bands holding him together a little bit too, with what doesn't hold together, as you can see. I've gotten all of his pieces glued together, and actually I've been working on his top half. And one thing I found is that the instructions kind of differ from what actually this kit is, and that tends to happen a lot in Toy Biz kits. I don't know why. I think it's somehow they decide to change because of the artists and the sculptors change things, but I don't know the reasons. I'm just pontificating here. One of the things was actually, let's see if I can get them back far enough. In the instructions, this arm is bent and this arm is straight. His right arm is bent, his left arm is straight, and the actual kit, you can see he's actually the other way around. One of the things I thought was kind of weird was it looks as if on this right arm he did have for the armband, and actually they show that in the instructions for the Nazi armband, but then they reverse the arms as if maybe they were looking at it backwards. I don't know. So I've gone through and kind of fiddled with this arm to try and make it look more excuse me, like the Nazi armband would be there. So that's kind of where I'm at. I've got most of the seams have been glued, and I've been working on putting on other parts. I will be leaving his head, and I should back up here a little bit, his head and his hands and probably this boot off when I paint, just so I'll put those on later because they're different colors anyway. Of course his head will be red, the gloves will be black, the suit is gray, and the boots are black. So as not to do that too much, I'll just leave those parts off. This one leg over here I do have to attach because of the knee connection there, and I have to work that seam. Where the boots come together, like in this one, and the gloves work the same way, since it's the boot itself, as you can see there, I can get away with leaving that off and painting the rest of them, and then painting his boot and putting it on, and once I glue it in place, it'll look okay. Let's see. He's starting to come apart. So, as part of the demonstration portion of this, I wanted to do a quick talk on the parts on the sprue. One thing you'll notice on these kits is the engineering is not the best. The points that connect the parts to the sprue are pretty big. I guess maybe that was for plastic flow or whatever reasonings they might have had for that, but I don't know for sure. Pontificating again and trying to, from what I can think of. So one of the things, I don't usually worry too much about where they're in the back of a pin that'll go into another part. That can be pretty ragged, but when I cut them off the sprue at parts that'll show, I usually spend some time sanding these down and making sure that they're pretty well smooth. So, just as a starting point, I've removed the one arm and I just stuck it together. I do dry fit these to see how bad the connections of the seams will be. You'll notice also that, like airplanes, they do have pins inside for alignment purposes. One of the things I've found working these seams is it's more like working an airplane than it is doing a car. That's my thought process on it. Where the fuselage of a plane would have, seams that would definitely need to be worked similar to this. Usually they're straight lines, though, of course. You would, I basically use the same methodology for that. When I get to putting on the bigger part, that's where a little extra sanding and some extra work comes into play. Okay, so I'll move down here to the bench and hopefully I'll be in shot. Okay, what I usually use, a liquid glue. This just happens to be Plastistruck. They all seem to work the same to me. I kind of liked Tennant's, but that's pretty strong stuff. So, like I said, the first thing I do when I take them off is I work the mounting point a little bit to make sure that's okay. I don't worry too much about this up here on the pins, except to make sure it's clean on the inside, so when I press the parts together, they'll fit nicely. So we'll do a little gluing here, just as a quick demo. One thing I'll mention too, on these brushes, I usually tend to cut about a third of them away. I found most of the brushes that come in the glues are usually pretty big, so I'll cut about a third to about a half away, and that usually seems to work better. I get a little bit more control. Okay, so what I tend to do is I'll try and put a good bead on the part while I'm holding it. And sometimes I do this 2 or 3 times to try and get it right. Then hopefully I won't knock this over since I'm not actually working at my workbench. I'll do the other side too, just for some extra. And let's see if I can get some more in here. Try and get a real good bead on so it stays wet, because of course these glues tend to dry very quickly. Okay, I think I've got somewhat of that done. This one's probably pretty dry, but then I try and press them together as hard as I can to get a little bit of squeeze out, same that you would do on a fuselage. And parts like here where there's a gap, I'll let capillary action pull in there a little bit. Of course, I've been having less trouble with this kit than I have with previous ones, so I'm just going to kind of go over it a little bit. Wait and squeeze. And I always take a rubber band, hopefully, and I wrap it up good and tight with getting as much pressure on it as I can. I'm doing this quick, so it's kind of not my typical methodology, but that you get the idea. Usually usually I get better squeeze out than that, but this is doing okay. Alright, then what I'll do is move over here for demonstration purposes. Usually you can mark the seam, and I take with a big long seam like this. I tend to work with a lot of different sanding. This is one I've just started to pick up. I think I got this at the dollar store. It's actually for fingernails. It's got an emery board and then sanding, and gets down to more of a polishing thing. I kind of stay away from the emery board a little bit, but just as you would do normally, it's a matter of sanding, 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 and looking, and sanding, and sanding, and looking, and sanding, and trying to cut off that bead. You can possibly see that. Let's see if I stand up, maybe I can make sure it's in the frame. Turn it a little bit. Nope, too low anyway. But as you can see, I started to get a sand through the permanent marker and into my bead. So, like I said, it's just a matter of continually sanding until you get down as far as you can tolerate to go. And then usually once I get down, of course this is just demonstration real quick, I'll turn and use a lighter grade to polish it up a little bit more and take some of the sanding scratches out. I'll have to work on that some more, but you get the idea. It's sand, sand, sand until you get it down flat. Okay? Nothing surprising there. Now, the fun part comes when you're trying to put the two parts together. I've found that there's definitely, a large seam created. I've spent a lot of time sanding the inside of these and where they're going to meet, so that I can try and minimize how big this is. These tend to have a round over in them, and that does take some filling. So that's let's see if I can. Once again, it's a matter of putting on as much glue and softening up to try and get basically a weld with a bead. And of course, working as quick as possible. La 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 la. Like I said, I since the stuff dries, excuse me, since the liquid glues dry so quickly, it takes a little action to get get it really melting. And of course, I'm rushing through this, but it's not anything I can't fix later if it doesn't quite come out the way I want. Put the cap on that, squeeze the living daylights out of it, and I tend to twist them a little bit too to see if I can get some more to come along for the ride. And I've been actually having some decent luck with Red Skull here. But of course I'm not going to now, but anyway. So, once again, that leaves a large bead. Of course, I'd normally let this sit for quite some time before I'd proceed anymore. I'd let the glue dry, and once again holding it as tight as possible for the longest duration I could tolerate, maybe up to a day. So I'd rubber band this bad boy again. Okay. And get that going. Oops. He's not going to stay now. Yeah, it's not going to stay. Anyway. The next stage, once I get that done, oh, I can use this elbow. Good. My infamous CD disc. I use these a lot for glues, for holding glues, when I'm going to work on something. That way I can get better control over picking up a glue spot and working it. Ignore it for now. I usually use Kicker with the CAs. So I'm using Gorilla Super Glue at this point. I've used thin and thicks. I found a lot of times the thick is pretty good because if you notice, if I can get this into the light a little bit better, you can see that's a pretty big seam. Oops. Pretty big seam, and of course you don't want that showing because that's the sleeve. So what I do is I tend to drop some of this onto my CD, and of course I knew I was going to do that. I forgot. So I'm just going to do a little bit of quick here. I'll pick up some of the super glue and just lay it into the seam, trying to get it a little bit flat but a little bit raised also. I like super glue over any other of the body fillers because it tends not to shrink as much, so I can get away with doing it less often. But I'll come along here and hit the seam and try and get it in as flat as possible. Probably should have done some work on this seam because there is some squeeze out in it, but that's okay because it just means I need less super glue. Okay. Now the one thing I will mention also with this is once you do this, you're intending to work your seams, don't decide you're going to walk away and go walk the dogs and have dinner, go out and see a movie or whatever else, because the stuff will get harder than the plastic itself, so it will not sand so well. So you really want to try and sand this within about an hour, within the hour of applying it. But I don't know if this is going to show up at all either, but I've gone around the whole seam with super glue, and it's standing fairly proud. One thing that's a little odd with the super glues, of course, as opposed to your putties and the other things, is that it's clear, and it tends to be a little hard to see. So once you start sanding it, I found that that tends to scuff it up, so that'll work fine. Alright, so once that dries, and like I said, I normally hit it with kicker, and I can't figure out what I do with my kicker, so I'm not even going to bother, and it's just a matter of coming in with your sanding utensils, like a stick, or, you know, a rougher stick, or sanding whatever you got. I try and finish off with about a 600 grit paper as a wet dry. I tend to lick it a little bit and sand, and to keep the grit a little clean, but of course you could just use water if you wanted. I try not to use too much water, but that's how that goes. So the last thing I'll do is I put silver paint around the seam. And that's my top tip, is to do that with all of your seams. And you can see I've done it in multitudes of places. This was 2 pieces that runs through the inside of his mouth. So I've put some silver on there. The silver reflects so well in the light, and you can see all the low spots and any other place that you would need to fill. And of course you can sand the silver off, you know, when you're finished, and then go on to your next painting step. So that's my tip on making sure that your seams, especially the seams like these, and I probably should have had this light higher, but anyway, because this, and particularly on this kit and Red Skull, he's got a lot of folds to his clothing and everything, so you want to try and work those folds and make sure that they're the same. And the same thing with Cap. When I get there, I mean, there's muscle changes in direction and things like that, so you're going to have to work those to smooth them and keep them, you know, in line and rounded, so you don't square everything off. And that's basically how I do that. And this is getting a lot longer than I expected. So, with that, oh, by the way, I just placed the base together. This isn't glued or anything. So, from here, I'm going to start working some more of the seams. I'll pretty much get the Red Skull ready for paint, and I'm going to start working on Cap. You can see he's still on sprue, so I got a lot of work to do on that. And from there, well, then once I get that far, I can start working on the base a little bit more. That's really just the 4 major pieces. A quick side trip for DC comic fans. I found these 2 in the dollar store. They're about 1/25th scale, strangely enough. And actually there are several Batmans. The Superman, I actually did a little work on him, because all he had was a red belt, and he didn't have his red skivvies. And the yellow wasn't painted, so I cleaned that up a little bit and painted him up and did the red S on the back of him too, just to have something to do. So they're living on my desk now, or well, on my studio desk here. So anyway, just a quick aside in case you're a big DC fan. They are, like I said, they're about 1/25th scale. They probably work well with one of your Batmobiles. You know, actually there's 4 different Batman. This is just one of them. So anyway, quick aside. I'll just say, have fun. Bye.